movement and the problem of underpopulation.
Having plenty of children is itself an expression of faith that God has a future for this world and for the church of which I am a part.
The Stand Radio, Saturdays at 4 and Sundays at 8 p.m. Central on AFR.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Thursday, January 9th, and as multiple fires blaze throughout LA County, prompting thousands of evacuations, this coming from the Daily Wire this morning, Joe Biden has approved a $500 million aid package to Ukraine, and nothing for actual American citizens. And it still seems like he is trying purposefully to undermine the Trump administration, to undermine Americans on his way out of office, because unfortunately for the next 11 days, he still is technically the president. And incoming President-elect Donald Trump has called on Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, to resign. And I think that's actually a very good idea, because a lot of what we're seeing in the response to, or the lack thereof, to the blazes in LA has really been a lack of government efficiency and understanding how to actually contain these and prepare for this type of natural disaster. And when Sky News attempted to ask the mayor there, Mayor Bass, questions yesterday, you have to watch this video. And I know we're on radio right now, but I posted the article on my X page, but I'm going to play you just a little bit of this clip. And while this reporter is asking her questions from Sky News, she literally is just standing there completely frozen, unwilling to even acknowledge his presence. It's so beyond not just embarrassing, but I think infuriating, especially if I was somebody in LA right now that either had to evacuate or lost a home or was even at risk. This would just be completely insulting. But listen to this. This is cut 4.
Do you owe citizens an apology for being absent while their homes were burning? Do you regret cutting the fire department budget by millions of dollars, Madam Mayor? Have you nothing to say today?
Can you back up? Appreciate it.
Have you absolutely nothing to say to the citizens today? Elon Musk says that you're utterly incompetent. Are you considering your position? Madam Mayor, have you absolutely nothing to say to the citizens today who are dealing with this disaster?
This here, because this goes on for another solid 2 minutes, and it's so bad. It is so bad. And so let's welcome in Spencer Lindquist, who is a Daily Wire investigative reporter. And Spencer, I think that these questions from Sky News are very apt because the mayor should be considering why the DEI hiring that LA County promoted, and also cutting the budget for the fire department. I mean, these are two critical things that necessarily impacted the fire response.
Oh, certainly. And this is something that really, comes into stark view when you see both those apocalyptic scenes that are coming out of that area. This is an area that, for me personally, it's a place that I love. I went to school just north of the Pacific Palisades, and we've got family friends in the area who've just lost their home. Of course, we're seeing the death toll rise in the area as well. And it's utterly tragic, but it's made more tragic when you see this type of silence from the leaders. And then just a little bit of digging, we find that there is a DEI push in the fire department. Americans across the country really are concerned about these types of DEI agendas, these types of policies that elevate race or gender identity over merit. But they're particularly concerned when it enters into realms and domains like this, where people's lives are at stake, where people's property is at stake, and where the safety of entire communities is at stake. And that's exactly what we're seeing in this scenario here.
So has anyone from California even, really respond to this? I mean, we saw that Biden cut his vacation short, shockingly, actually, to do a press conference, which he ultimately made about him, acknowledging, his the birth of his great grandson. Which congratulations to him for that, but maybe not the most appropriate venue when people are suffering and you're trying to address this type of catastrophe. And so, I mean, is anyone on the Democrat leadership side, either federal or state, taking any responsibility for these policies?
I mean, we saw that response from Biden, which really was rather bizarre, and then just a complete lack of response from the mayor. This is a time in crisis when you'd think that leaders would need to step to the forefront more than ever. And then, of course, we've got problems, going down the leadership pipeline. There's been video circulating of the Los Angeles Fire Department Chief, Kristen Crowley, and she outlined her DEI agenda. She was actually integral, it appears, to the establishment of a DEI bureau within the fire department. And this is a fire department that had its budget slashed, but it still had money for DEI. There was actually some DEI expenditures out of the 2022 and 2023 season that were dedicated to targeted recruitment of women and members of underrepresented groups. Of course, we know that effectively means that there's race-based hiring, sex-based hiring that discriminates against people, namely those who are white and male. And this was an express aim of this fire department. And right now, I guarantee you that the people in Los Angeles are not concerned about the race or the sex of the person who's trying to stop their home from burning down. They're not worried about the gender identity of the individual who's trying to save their life or save the lives of their family or their friends or their community. But this is something that they were clearly preoccupied with. And there was actually a local news broadcast that was celebrating this fire department chief, Chief Crowley, celebrating her DEI agenda and saying that she checks a box when it comes to diversity and inclusion, that she is the first LGBT fire chief. Again, this is something that really doesn't factor into the mind of people who simply want to be kept safe by their fire department. And of course, as this continues, I'm sure there'll be more and more investigations into potential mismanagement from the state, potential mismanagement from the leadership of that fire department, and the ways that maybe the severity of these fires could have been reduced.
Wow. And I'm speaking with Spencer Lindquist, who is a Daily Wire investigative reporter. And this goes to a broader problem from the left that is promoting and incentivizing these types of DEI policies over not just merit-based hiring, but actual good practices like maybe doing their job. Because if you are a fire chief and you don't have funds going to the right resources, you don't have enough water to fight fires. And, we know that, as you mentioned, the fire department had their funding cut by $17.6 million, according to reports months before the wildfires broke out. We're seeing the consequences in real time of these ridiculous diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities. So what should we be concerned about now before the next type of wildfire starts that perhaps the new incoming Trump administration or state and local governments can correct and change course before it's too late?
So there's one representative out of California. His name is Bill Afali, and he is from the 63rd District, just south of Los Angeles. And he actually laid out various different policies that could have been in place, some that were rejected, some that simply failed to meet the desk of Governor Newsom. But there's a number of different policies that could be taken to potentially reduce the severity. Of course, there's a lot of different factors right now that are contributing to the spread of this fire. You've got the Santa Ana winds, which are, I've heard, over 100 miles an hour, and of course that is making the fire drastically more difficult to fight, and it's increasing its spread rather rapidly. But right now there's a number of different environmental barriers that actually make it particularly difficult for organizations to fireproof the area. So he pointed out that there are over 100 million dead trees, an estimated 163 million dead trees that are just kind of clogging up California forests. And if you've ever been to that area, if you've ever been to the Pacific Palisades or, anywhere in Malibu or just south of it, that's an extremely dry and arid area. And if that's an area that is allowed to collect dead brush, dead trees, it really just makes it a tinderbox. So I think there's a number of different policies that could be taken, or at the very least could be considered, to look at ways that the wildlife there could be managed to reduce the severity of these fires when they do arrive.
Wow. And this just shows again the multiple failures, because some other things that have come out in reporting have been how the environmentalists and some of these kinds of people on the left and the woke nonsense who haven't wanted the government to do some of these controlled burns or get rid of some of these dead trees and all of those things have contributed significantly to the fires. And there was a clip that resurfaced from Joe Rogan's show when Donald Trump went on during the 2024 campaign, and he was talking about how California was mismanaging not only their water crisis but also the foresting and all that. And he got reamed and criticized for that, and saying, oh, well, you just don't care about the environment and all of this other nonsense. But it turns out he was right.
Absolutely. It's really a tragic irony that there are people who are trying to safeguard the environment. And unfortunately, really what it seems to have resulted in is just this backlog of brush, of trees that really have just made the area ripe for this type of rapidly spreading and severe fire. So that's an area that really it's intended to go through burns, right? There's a fire season in California. I evacuated from a fire my first year at Pepperdine when I was there in the area. So these fires are commonplace, but there certainly are ways that are very environmentally conscious that can actually limit the severity of these fires. And it seemed that there was an opposition to those on ideological grounds. And unfortunately now, we're seeing potentially the results of those efforts.
Yeah, and I'm seeing here on X on Colin Rugg, who posts a lot of just different clips and other things. If listeners want to follow him on X, sometimes some good information there. And it's a clip of Gavin Newsom being interviewed by Anderson Cooper on CNN, and literally upset that Donald Trump is blaming him for the California fires. And the background is literally a giant blaze, and he's standing there mad at Trump, saying that he's politicizing it. I mean, you can't get a more stark picture of the failures of the government. So what about and I'm speaking of Spencer Lundquist, who's a Daily Wire investigative reporter. And Spencer, there have also been reports about some big insurance companies, like, for example, State Farm, that canceled some homeowners' policies in the months before this fire. And there's been a lot of social media backlash against that. Is there any merit to that?
We've seen some reports of that. Right now it's still something that we're in the process of confirming. But we've seen that there's various different homes and neighborhoods in the Palisades that appear to have had their insurance cut. There's a degree of speculation online as to why that might be, and the extent to which policies at the state level and regulations may have actually, in some people's estimation, almost compelled, made it overly cumbersome to insure these areas because of state policy. That's some people's interpretation of these events. But what we do know is that, this fire, it appears to be spreading. It looks like it's in the Hollywood Hills now. Yesterday, the death toll was at 2 people, unfortunately, and now it looks like 5 people have lost their lives in this fire. So it appears to be spreading, and, this is a scenario that if we just look at the images out of California, it's almost difficult to grasp the severity of this scenario until you see some of these videos, you see some of these radio broadcasts between the firefighters. But, it's utterly tragic, and seeing some of these images of neighborhoods that are now just completely and utterly unrecognizable. It's an utterly tragic scenario.
It is. And thank you so much for your reporting on this. And we'll be following Daily Wire's stories and reporting. Spencer Lundquist, who's an investigative reporter for the Daily Wire. You can follow him on X at Spencer Lundquist. And be praying for all of those who are affected by these fires, and also that we as a country and that each individual state would reconsider some of these ridiculous, disastrous DEI policies before the next type of disaster strikes, when clearly these Democrat leftists aren't prepared to handle that because they're prioritizing their ideology over your safety and health. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
The words you are about to hear are taken from letters sent in by members of the Trinity Debt Management Program.
Dear Trinity, today I'm making my final credit card payment.
Before I came to you, I was in a constant state of anxiety and panic, but now there is hope for my family's financial future.
Working with Trinity made me understand that I'm not alone.
You really do help people.
Your kindness will never be forgotten.
Without Trinity's support, I would not have achieved my lifelong goal of becoming debt-free.
We saved a lot on interest and penalties, of course, but the reward was the gift of human kindness.
Trinity has carried me through a very difficult time in my life. You're amazing.
I used to feel so anxious and hopeless. Now I feel grace and peace.
God bless Trinity as you continue to help others become debt-free.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813.
So right now may be the perfect time for you to rethink how you pay for health care. And here's why. This time of year is decision time for a lot of people, but it's also when you can join MediShare and save even more than usual. For many families, joining MediShare means saving about $500 a month, which is a game changer for a lot of people, obviously. But what's more, MediShare members like it a lot. Their satisfaction rate is 98%. Imagine that. And MediShare is a proven thing, too, for over 30 years. It's a Christian community of hundreds of thousands of people now. And here's the thing. If you join before January 15th and you use the promo code SHARE, they'll waive your application fee. So you save even more right off the bat. I'll give you the number here in a second, but just call and you'll get a price within 2 minutes. And again, the deadline is January 15th. So call now and you'll save even more. Here's the number, 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE, 833-44-BIBLE.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. The University of California, Los Angeles is going through a pronoun crisis. Posters have been plastered on dorm rooms across campus urging students to respect diversity and avoid using terms like freshmen and guys. Students have also been told that all conversations with classmates should start with a clarification of their preferred pronouns. UCLA recently hosted a workshop called Pronouns Matter. In this postmodern era, she and he are no longer vogue. Instead, UCLA is advocating for inclusive language, and they've introduced a whole new set of pronouns: they, fair, fairs, v, ver, vers, and z, zem, zers. The good news is most Americans consider these make-believe pronouns to be a load of grade A hooey, 65% to be exact. The bad news is that roughly 35% of the country really does believe you can self-identify as a horse or an azalea bush. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And, as if Donald Trump needed more distractions from coming in as the president-elect and taking the Oval Office back on January 20th, of course, this is what the left is trying to do. And we saw that in his first term, that they tried to throw everything at him to distract him with all of these ridiculous investigations and impeachments and hoaxes and so forth. And so the case out of New York is trying to be that distraction. So this coming from the Epoch Times, Trump asks the Supreme Court, this is the U.S. Supreme Court, to halt sentencing in the New York case. So the president-elect seeks to delay the January 10th sentencing, which would be tomorrow, citing presidential immunity concerns and potential harm to the institution of the presidency. So Trump's legal team filed an emergency request with the nation's highest court on January 8th. So they filed that yesterday, arguing that the proceeding with sentencing could cause, quote, grave injustice and harm to the institution of the presidency and the operations of the federal government. unquote. So the Supreme Court has requested a response from New York prosecutors by January 9th. Today. So joining us now to discuss all this and more is our good friend Will Chamberlain, who is senior counsel at the Article 3 Project. And Will, this just seems to be completely frivolous at this point that New York is actually planning to proceed with sentencing. But I've also heard on the other side of this that he needs to actually go through with some kind of final conclusion in sentencing so that he can end up appealing. So what's kind of the legal in terms of your perspective?
Well, I see it as Merchant trying to preserve what he can of the trial he oversaw and has relentlessly defended with kind of even pretty aggressive rulings. So, you know, he's aware that he can't punish President Trump right now. I mean, he's a state judge, you know, there's no world in which he could put the incoming president of the United States in jail, for example, or impose any punishment on him to make his life harder. So, I mean, even in the filing or in the order where he announced that he was going to hold the sentencing, he basically tipped his hand and said the likely punishment here is going to be unconditional discharge, meaning nothing, no punishment, no conditions, nothing. But the idea is I think he wants to still preserve the notion that Trump is a convicted felon and to pass a sentence that includes the conviction. And that said, I mean, there's the one benefit, if you want to call it that, for Trump is that he can appeal it. He can appeal any sentence, and he's not able to appeal in the absence of a sentence generally. But I think that, you know, from Team Trump's perspective, I think that this is just, you know, basically they want to get the immunity issue resolved in the first place, and they just never want him to have to face a sentence. And I think the fact that it's also just this sort of audacity of, you know, calling a sentencing within a week, right before the guy's about to become the president of the United States, just seems ridiculous.
Yeah, and it seems like a total PR move. And the immunity piece of this, I think, is really fascinating because we saw the Supreme Court case out of that, which rightly parsed the issue, not just for Trump, but for every president. So for people listening, I mean, I think that the Supreme Court actually got it right that said that presidents in their official capacity for acts that they do in the capacity of their office are protected, are immune. But things that they do in their personal capacity or perhaps like as a candidate on a campaign, you know, those would not have the same immunity as official acts done in the office of the presidency. So then there has to be a finding of fact on a trial court level, or whoever the arbiter happens to be, you know, whatever level that is. There has to be a finding of what falls into what category in terms of the allegations or the alleged conduct. And so here, in this instance, what is really fascinating about the application of that case, Will, is that some of the testimony that came out in the New York case, rightly, I think on face, should be covered under presidential immunity and should not have been allowed to be entered into evidence. So that really seems to be the heart of Team Trump's immunity argument that would seek not only a new trial, but perhaps, you know, outright dismissal. And so there is merit to that type of application.
Yeah, and I mean, you want to resolve immunity issues before any type of sentencing. But the whole idea of immunity is that it's immunity from process as a general idea. And so Trump is entitled to both appeal that before any sentence. Really should have been able to appeal it before trial. It should have been an interlocutory appeal. And I mean, and further, I think that obviously, like, if, you know, even in a world where Trump didn't prevail in this case, I think that this trial would have gotten tossed exactly on those grounds because Judge Merchant allowed evidence of the president's official acts to be entered in at trial. He probably didn't even need to, but he did it anyway. And the result of that would have, you know, the Supreme Court squarely said that's just not allowed. That's just a way to kind of circumvent presidential immunity through the back door. So, yeah, I ultimately don't think. I mean, I think the Supreme Court will probably step in here. I just think they're, you know, the idea of not putting they'll want to put in place an actual stay so they can consider the arguments going both ways. And they're not for whatever reason, they're not on the same schedule that Judge Merchant is. I mean, Judge Merchant is really rushing this. He's really rushing this. You know, the idea of I'm issuing an order, show up next week, and you're on a 2-week deadline, like the Supreme, and there's an issue like presidential immunity lingering in the background, something as consequential as that. There's no way. I would be very, very surprised if the Supreme Court didn't impose a stay and stop the sentencing from taking place.
Yeah, and so do you know, is this a matter of just the one justice who's assigned, and I think it's the Ninth Circuit out of New York, so that would be Chief Justice Roberts. Is it just his call in terms of the stay, or does this go before the entire court for their review?
I mean, I think that's actually a good question. I would need to look at it. I think, you know, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I have to look it up again because I know that they both have a role. I don't know if there's sort of like the initial stay is the decision of the one Supreme Court justice, and then somehow like the multiple justices can step in as well. I think I suspect that it's a matter of comity where it's like if multiple justices, if 3 or 4 or 4 or 5 justices are saying you should put a stay in here, that even if the one justice disagrees, they'll go along with what their colleagues want. That would be my guess, but I don't know the exact process there, whether it's like sole discretion of one of the justices.
Yeah, and actually, I don't either. So we'll look at this, and this is why you should follow both me and Will Chamberlain on X, because we can follow up with the answers to some of these interesting questions. And this is why the practice of law, to me, is so fascinating, because there are always these types of questions. And what a great law school answer to say, or even a courtroom answer to say, that's a good question, and I will follow up in briefing. So I'll look forward to your post on that, Will Chamberlain. But he knows exactly what I'm talking about. All right. But let's also move to the confirmation hearings that are set for next week. So according to reports, Pam Bondi for U.S. Attorney General nomination is set for Wednesday and Thursday of next week. There was a post from Steve Bannon that said that this got continued, but I haven't really seen that confirmed anywhere. So at least as far as I'm aware of, as of yesterday, from the U.S. Senate Committee on the Judiciary, they had a press release that Pam Bondi's hearing to be the Attorney General of the United States is set for next week. We saw Dick Durbin, of course, one of the Democrat senators, come out and say, I met with Pam Bondi and I have serious concern. Nobody's really surprised about that. So how do we think this initial set of confirmation hearings will go?
I think it'll be pretty straightforward. I mean, Pam Bondi's pretty clearly qualified. She was an attorney general of the state of Florida, one of the biggest states in the country. She's a very experienced lawyer for a long time. If the complaint of the Democrats is that Pam Bondi will be too loyal to President Trump, like that's the extent of the argument. I don't think any Republicans will find that persuasive as a reason to reject Pam Bondi. I also think that there's been enormous pressure put on Republican senators over other candidates whose nominations were on shakier ground, and now they look pretty sound. I mean, Pete Hegseth is the most obvious example. There was a lot of talk that Hegseth would have to withdraw, but there was a full court press, both from Team Trump and from like influencers and the media more broadly, that seems to have broadened those senators into line. So I suspect that this will be actually not one of the more contentious confirmation hearings, and that, while the Democrats may posture, that ultimately every Republican will be on board, and that will be sufficient to get her confirmed as the Attorney General.
And I'm speaking with Will Chamberlain, who's senior counsel at the Article 3 Project. You can also follow the Article 3 Project on X as well, and the great work that he and Mike Davis and others do there. And, is this, Will, a strategy of Team Trump to put up a couple of nominees first that they feel will be the strongest and kind of sail through? Or is this entirely up to the Senate's discretion, and they may or may not be on the same page with which nominee goes first?
I think that I don't think it's a strategy so much, because I think they're also trying to get Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel all through as well. And, those are, there's been varying degrees of controversy surrounding them, but I think they're focused on getting their national security and legal people in first. That's I think, where the priority lies. So I would suspect that you'll see those 4 confirmations is kind of like the first and most important ones. Like they want Pam Bondi in place in DOJ. They want Kash in place of the FBI. They want Pete Hegseth in as Secretary of Defense. They don't want some Obama, some Biden holdover, and they're going to want Tulsi Gabbard in at DNI because they don't want another Biden holdover dealing with intelligence while after President Trump's inaugurated. They want their core national security people in, and then they'll start, I think, going to more of the domestic focused agencies.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, that we certainly don't want any of the holdovers. I don't think America wants, or at least the conservatives, but the Democrats certainly would want to delay potentially as much as possible to keep those positions with the former appointees. So that raises the question, well, why didn't we see recess appointments like what Trump was initially suggesting?
It turns out that the logistics of getting a recess appointment are basically the exact same of confirming a nominee, and so you might as well just could get a nominee who can get the votes to be confirmed, because I think the Senate ultimately rejected the idea that it would just abandon its advise and consent function, and by allowing a recess to take place, and they have the ability to stop that. We didn't win a sufficient Senate majority to essentially be able to force the Senate into recess. And so I think that pretty quickly that Trump got around that. And I think Team Trump also realized, one, after Gates left, and after the Hegseth drama resolved itself, that they had sufficient pressure to put on the senators to get them to confirm qualified nominees, that, whatever misgivings or whatever they had about Hegseth or Kash Patel or whatever, that, I'm sorry, those people are on paper qualified, and President Trump deserves and is entitled to his cabinet, so he should get it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And this was from the Washington Times just this morning on that potential delay. So the headline is, Grassley expects delay on DOJ and FBI picks. So confirmation hearings for President-elect Donald Trump's Attorney General and FBI Director nominees may be postponed. Senator Chuck Grassley, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, said on Tuesday. So the hearing that was scheduled, or is still currently scheduled for January 14th for Pam Bondi, may be delayed a week, he's saying, because of a background investigation, and then there's some sort of ethics report we have to have. Grassley noted that if the committee can't get to Miss Bondi right away, it would interview Kash Patel for the FBI slot. So either, and you just mentioned Kash Patel, Will. So it looks like if Pam Bondi can't move forward next week, then that slot will be given to Kash Patel, and that's either of those is a good thing. But this is really interesting when we're talking about the ethics report potentially. That to me kind of signals that they may be looking into, the Senate may be looking into the allegation of Pam Bondi, while she was Florida Attorney General, taking a donation from Donald Trump and then declining to prosecute or to look into some issue that related to him, which to my knowledge, that's never really been raised as an ethics question other than by Democrats in the media. But that was, at least in some reports, raised as a potential reason why Pam Bondi wasn't nominated for Attorney General in Trump's first go-around, and he doesn't really seem to care about that this time. Do you think that there's any substance there, and that's potentially what this ethics report is signaling?
I don't think there's any substance there. I mean, obviously, Trump had two attorney generals. He had, for the vast majority of his term, he had Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr. Jeff Sessions was chosen because Jeff Sessions was the first major national politician to endorse Donald Trump and was given the right, was told you can choose where you want to serve, and he chose DOJ. And then Bill Barr was chosen because of the specific importance of dealing with this obstruction of justice issue that the Mueller investigation was pursuing. Bill Barr was very deep on that, and had articulated a very different view than Rod Rosenstein, and so simply installing him as DOJ basically changed the DOJ's view to the correct view in my opinion. And also Bill Barr had been a former attorney general in the first Bush administration, so it was just those are the two main guys, and I don't think really in either case Pam Bondi was a realistic consideration for either position. I was there at the time. I don't remember her name being floated at all. Which is not a attack on Pam Bondi. It's just she just wasn't really up for consideration at the time, as far as I know. So the idea that somehow this ethics thing is some bombshell that was the reason she wasn't selected 8 years ago and is now going to pop up and hurt her, I just don't think that's right.
And that's really good information as well. And we're seeing that, in the next Trump administration, there's a whole different set of people. I mean, there's a few from that have been with Trump kind of throughout the entire duration of his political career, but we're seeing a whole different team. And while Pam Bondi, of course, has been she was one of the attorneys that actually I worked with on the very first impeachment. Some other things, she's certainly been around Trump world. I think that's really good analysis, and I appreciate you sharing that personal insight as well from your experience, Will Chamberlain. I think she's a fantastic pick for Attorney General. She should sail through, and a lot of these media reports, we should probably look with the air of skepticism that likely a lot of these reports are on purpose, making some of these questions a little more pronounced of, maybe there's going to be some issue. But as you said, Trump is entitled to his cabinet picks, and I think the Senate needs to really go with that line of logic. But Will Chamberlain, really appreciate your analysis as always. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the
Let's think about what God has done. I would wager that his top news story is still that the free salvation through the blood of Jesus Christ is available to all. I wager that will be the top news story until that salvation is no longer available. You will have made your decision for eternity. He doesn't ask us to do anything he won't, and then he does above what we can possibly do.
Hear Todd Herman on A Disciple's View, weekdays 12 p.m. Central on AFR. Washington Watch with Tony Perkins.
You look at 3 of the 4 justices there in Colorado that voted to remove him from the ballot. They all came from Ivy League schools that had been created as divinity schools. What a picture of the apostasy in America when it comes to the church.
Stay informed with Tony Perkins and his guests on Washington Watch, weekdays at 4 p.m. Central on AFR, or catch up anytime with the podcast at afr.net.
God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Psalm 46 is a popular psalm as it includes the text, "Be still and know that I am God." This was the conclusion to a psalm that previously observed, "Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling." This described what looked like the end of the world. Nevertheless, the psalmist remained unshaken. He refused to allow present difficulty to cause him to forget God's past faithfulness. Virus or no virus, God is our refuge and strength.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
Hey, 8 Days of Hope family. These last few years have been the busiest ever for the ministry. In fact, in 2024, we deployed a record 23 times to love and serve those in need. And we couldn't do all that God has asked for us to do without your continued prayers and support. So today we're excited to share that we've partnered with Free Will to provide you with an opportunity to leave a legacy of hope for generations to come, all while securing a stable future for your loved ones. We hope to take advantage of this amazing partnership and the ability to create your legal will. It's 100% free to you, and most people finish in 20 minutes or less. Free Will also offers the opportunity to help you make a smart gift to support the efforts of 8 Days of Hope. That's a donation of stocks, QCDs, DAFs, or crypto. So to learn more about how to utilize this resource or to make a smart gift today, please visit 8daysofhope.com. And remember, your support leaves a kingdom impact for the brokenhearted.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, if you believe Mark Zuckerberg for absolutely anything, then you will be excited to hear that he is changing some of the Facebook or Meta content policies, algorithms, and so forth. So this coming from CBS, Meta to end fact-checking, replacing it with community-driven system akin to Elon Musk's X. So he said on Tuesday that the social media company is ending its fact-checking program and replacing it with a community-driven system. Zuckerberg cited the outcome of the 2024 U.S. presidential election as underlying the decision, calling it a, quote, cultural tipping point towards, once again, prioritizing speech. He made that announcement on a video and said, "We are going to get rid of fact-checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X." So he's basically admitting that censorship really didn't work and that the American people, and especially conservatives, are pushing back against that. And we've seen so many more people go to X for the purpose of actually being allowed to post opinions and say things like there are only two genders without getting kicked out like the Babylon Bee did, just for making a joke. And Meta is probably losing a lot of not only revenue but users because of that. So is this shift legit? Well, let's welcome in Christian Lasval, who is the digital director for the Heritage Foundation. Christian, I think a lot of people are, on one hand, welcoming this from Mark Zuckerberg, but are also very skeptical as to the actual implementation of this kind of grandiose commitment or refound commitment to free speech.
And Jenna, good morning. Thanks for having me. I think that's the right attitude to have. This is welcome news, but it is worth being skeptical over. Remember, Mark Zuckerberg has a long history, approaching 10 years now on Facebook, of aggressive censorship. And like you mentioned in the opening of this segment, he pretty much admits in that video that this change is as a result of changing political tides. Not that he has a personal conviction about trying to defend free speech, not that necessarily he believes what he did was wrong. There was no apology included in that video. It was simply the political tides have turned, and this is what's most beneficial and in the interest of Facebook as a platform for numerous reasons. One, because in 2024, the House Judiciary Committee was investigating Facebook for its roles in censorship over the COVID pandemic and the Hunter Biden laptop. And Mark Zuckerberg admitted in a letter to that committee that they did, in fact, abide by the pressures that were put on them from the Biden-Harris administration to censor information on those subjects on their platforms. So he is concerned about congressional investigations with this new Republican majority in Congress. And he is, of course, concerned about his bottom line because, as you mentioned, users are flocking to places like X, where its owner put his own money on the line to protect free speech when it wasn't popular and wasn't politically safe to do so, and where they can get their opinions out into the public eye without facing repercussions for it. So that is the exact right approach that people should take to this. Welcome it, take advantage of it for while we have it, but don't put all your eggs in that basket because he is a fair-weathered friend.
Yeah, I think that's a very spot on analysis, and it's unfortunate that it is that way. And as you mentioned, Christian Lasval, we can applaud that and say, okay, this is a good thing, that maybe this is the market, correcting what has been a censorship problem, and also voters saying, we don't want even the tech oligarchs in our quote unquote government, or maybe as part of the fourth or fifth estate, to be over-regulating things that really we should have freedom in, like a digital public square. But this raises the question then, because it's so situationally based, that in the next couple of years, if hopefully the Democrats don't retake the House or Senate, but we see that those types of things happen in future elections. If the winds change, then maybe Facebook and Meta will change their policies. So is it incumbent at this point on the Republican trifecta to revisit things like Section 230, or revisit things like these platforms not being allowed to censor content because they are public forums?
I think so. I think the Republican majorities in Congress can't squander this opportunity. And the real thing that they need to be focused on is transparency. One of the biggest faults of the social media companies right now, which was the case with Twitter before it became X, is we don't know anything about how their algorithms work. We don't know how they're implementing their supposed policies and rules of engagement on their platform. They very publicly sometimes enforce those selectively. So it appears that there are different standards for different people, and no one is really sure how to stay away from the rules that they say they have when they don't even enforce them equally. So transparency is really the biggest thing that these social media companies need to be required to have. Transparency in the algorithm, transparency in their rules enforcement, the ability to actually engage with a human for support requests rather than a dead end on a computer. Those are really the areas where I think there can be even some bipartisan support for, where we're not necessarily forcing a company to say you must accept one speech over another, but instead say you must be transparent about what you are permitting and what you are not permitting on the platform in a way that they have not historically done, except for X after Elon purchased it. And then we found out there was, in fact, blacklists of people who were being censored more than others. There was, in fact, burying or shadow banning certain accounts and certain words that were politically affiliated that would immediately get your post throttled. We don't know any of those things about Facebook. We have our guesses on it based on our use of the platforms where we can tell, hey, if we speak on this subject, we notice a significant impact in our reach, and we notice that the post does not appear as much as others, even though I didn't receive a quote-unquote strike or I didn't receive a notice that I violated a policy. We can still see the content performance changing dramatically. That has to change. The transparency needs to be there, and it's not right now.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. And so unless Mark Zuckerberg does what Elon did and just provides all of the information and transparency of his own accord, should the government be able to compel that?
I think the government should be able to compel that because the social media companies have become the modern day public square. So they are enjoying these protections from Section 230 as though they are platforms where they are not in charge of the editorial content that appears there. And they're allowed to have rules and policies of, hey, here's what we accept, here's what we don't. But again, that's not equally enforced and it's not transparent. So if that were to change, and the government should be able to compel that, then we would have more of that transparency and that equal enforcement of the policies that isn't there right now. And it is important to know, which you made note of, Zuckerberg did not give specifics on how these community notes on Facebook will work. It remains to be seen whether that will be as transparent as what X has and how, if they'll even explain how a community note appears on a post or not. So a lot of to be decideds here in Mark Zuckerberg's updated policy announcements.
Yeah, and what about X's new potential policy? And Elon has been very clear it hasn't been implemented yet, and yet it was announced. This whole amplifying of positivity and negative posts that were deemed by the algorithm to be too negative or too inflammatory toward politicians, maybe were going to be throttled. There was a lot of pushback against that, calling it a social credit score, saying that this was akin to censorship, bringing back some of the old rules. Like under Jack Dorsey and the former Twitter. How do you view at least what we know about this whole positivity policy?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know. And I think that reflects the opinion of most people using the X platform is we don't really understand what Elon meant when he said he wants more positive content and that sort of content will perform better than not positive content. I think that's an area where X is going to need to define its rules better as well so that users have, again, transparency in what are the actual rules of your platform. Is it certain subjects that are considered negative? Is it certain terms that are considered negative? We ought to know what those are and have a pretty transparent explanation of that so that we can engage with the platform and not be concerned about getting throttled by not knowing what the rules actually are. So that is a big open-ended question there. I haven't seen anyone on the platform, including Elon, be able to provide an explanation of what exactly that means, and that ought to change. And I hope Elon does because, again, his purchase of the platform and his actions following that have been towards more transparency and more specifics on what's permitted and what's not. So I hope he follows suit in this regard as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the lack of clarity is what is concerning a lot of people who are pushing back. And if there was more clarity and users understood, okay, here's what's actually going to happen, and we were all comfortable with that, then there wouldn't be as much concern. And I think especially conservatives who have been through a lot of the censorship, especially during COVID in 2020 and then election integrity concerns, who have had their accounts throttled held shadow banned or even outright suspended, are very concerned about these types of things. And we don't know the definitions, like unregretted user seconds. Like, what exactly does that mean? And, my post on that was kind of tongue in cheek. Like, does anybody really have unregretted user seconds on social media? Like, we all doom scroll all the time, and I'm pretty sure we all regret that, but we do it anyway. But, things like that just aren't really good definitions. So where does Trump's digital Bill of Rights kind of fall into all this? Because, he's out here talking about, Canada and Greenland and, the Gulf of America and some of these other things that I'm just like, okay, those aren't really the priorities. But I know that, some of his deputies will focus on more substance, of course. And so we haven't really heard a lot about his digital Bill of Rights lately. Is that something still in the mix?
I would hope so, and like you said, I think there will be people in his administration who will be tasked with focusing on those issues. And again, I hope that because of his personal experiences with big tech censorship, let's not forget, in the wake of the January 6 riots, Meta suspended his Facebook and his Instagram account, and they were not recovered for over a year after the political tides turned. So if you're sensing the theme here in what drives Mark Zuckerberg's actions on his platforms. But I do hope that given that personal experience he had from being censored without just cause, and again, seemingly subjectively, that his administration will put a big emphasis on making sure that social media companies are transparent with their rules and that they are fair in their enforcement. Be very clear with us. What do you allow and what do you not allow on your platform? And if you're going to enforce it for one side, you have to enforce it equally for the other. So yes, I do think that will be something that his administration will focus on. I certainly hope it is the case. And I think, again, his personal experience ought to give him a little bit of an extra drive of making that a priority, so that in this digital public square where today, the news is driven by what happens on X. You watch news on TV, but they're talking about things that are being reported, statements that are being released, videos that are being posted on X. That's the public square in social media. It might include other platforms if they were more transparent about their policies and people didn't have to worry about being censored for talking about these things. But yes, it is incumbent on the legislature in the social media companies' failure to properly manage themselves. They have to be able to protect the free speech, the legislature does, to protect the free speech of Americans so that they can arbitrarily silence some opinions without just cause.
Yeah, and really well said that, Trump's own personal experience should prompt him to put this at the forefront. I mean, if he's been the most attacked human being in modern American history with all of the lawfare and investigations and hoaxes and all of this nonsense, certainly being deplatformed and censorship has played a large role into that. I mean, he was off of Twitter completely and only had his account reinstated once Elon Musk purchased it and made it into X. And that's a huge thing. I mean, he is a prolific voice there. And that was in the first administration. Primarily how he communicated to the American people was posting those things on social media. I personally, even before I worked for him, appreciated that. And even though, some people, the mean tweets and whatever, okay, fine, but in terms of just the sheer content of knowing we're hearing directly from the leader, not the intern that posts for him, like Joe Biden's account, was part of the transparency of the government. And I think we all appreciated that. So to your knowledge, I mean, is Heritage working on, or is Congress working on any type of legislation in this vein?
Yes, if you go to heritage.org, you can always check our website and you can search any kind of topic that you want to. But if you go on heritage.org and you type in big tech or social media, you can find reports that we've written, which again, our biggest push is for transparency. We want to be able to know what are your rules. And then, of course, once you have the policy mandates that these social media companies have to meet certain transparency thresholds, then it's much easier to keep them in line for enforcing that correctly or not, enforcing it subjectively by political whim or whether it is an actual violation of their policy as defined by the platform. We don't have that right now, and if we did, it would make things a whole lot better. But we have several different research papers on that you can read for yourself and see the policy recommendations that we have. But again, the overall focus and push right now is the social media companies keep their algorithms, keep their enforcement policies and strategies a secret. We need to know what those are so we can engage with the platform fairly. And then if they're not following their own policies, that's a separate legal matter that can be addressed at a later point.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why the work of the Heritage Foundation is incredibly important. And it also gives you, the reader, some more knowledge and background and tools to then be able to effectively tell your members of Congress what they should be doing to protect the digital public square. So Christian Lasval, always appreciate your insights and commentary. You can follow him on X at Christian Lasval. And you can always reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family